Fantastic. Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to another one in the series of webinars that Dementia SA offers on a Tuesday from 12 to 1. This is the second part in our series by Danuta Lipinska, very, very well-known author, a dementia care specialist, and certainly somebody who is the author of two books which are really sought after because it's a topic that isn't really discussed within the realms of dementia. And today's webinar is going to be focused on the brain, dementia, and behavior. And I think the context of this, it follows on from last week's unbelievable webinar. And that is, if you're wanting to get some kind of context, if you're watching this one and you're wanting to get a context of it, then watch the first one. So this is the second one in the series, and there's a third one. So we're in for a treat. And I'm not going to go through Danuta's bio, because that is on her website. So please hop along to that and see. It's Danuta, DANUTA LIPINSKA.com. And certainly it is a website that is full of interesting facts, a lot of work of what Danuta has done, and certainly also about her two books which she has written. We're in for a treat, and Danuta, thank you very, very much. If during the conversation it comes, there are some questions which come up, please pop them into the chat. Abigail is going to be monitoring that. And then when we finish the actual recording, we're going to be interacting with Danuta then without the recording on. We want you to feel as comfortable as possible. And without further ado, over to you, Danuta. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Karen and Abigail. It's an absolute delight to be with you in Cape Town and in South Africa. And it's very chilly here in northern England.
As much as you can.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Sorry about that, Danuta. Somebody was unmuted.
That's okay. These things happen in the wonders of technology. Can you see me and hear me?
We can see you and we can hear you.
Okay, so here we go, take two. It's lovely to be with you all. And this, the bigger context here is, sexually speaking, person-centered conversations about dementia, love, sex, intimacy, and well-being. And as Karen said, we invite you to hop back and take a look and listen to the first one if you haven't already. But I'm going to be starting this off with a whole new take on this extensive topic. But because we have quite a bit to get through today, I've divided it up into sections so that we can tackle it more easily. So 1, brain, sex, aging, and well-being. 2, sensuality and sexual behavior. 3, brain basics. 4, brain, sex, and disinhibition. And 5, why do humans have sex? Good question. So here we go. 1, brain, sex, aging, and well-being. Since we last met, we celebrated Valentine's Day. Well, some of us did. It is a reminder, with this topic arriving at the same time, to reconsider sex, love, sensuality, and being able to give and receive loving thoughts and feelings, not only towards others, but also towards ourselves. Our loving and caring selves can go on in time, even when changes in the brain make cooking dinner or reading the newspaper a challenge. We bring these experiences into later life, and we can find romance again, or for the first time, or experience it differently with our partner of many years, with or without sex. The same is true when a dementia is not present. As the heart is often the representative of Valentine's Day, let's take a quick look at the relationship between the heart and the brain. Interesting new research tells us that the heart and brain communicate, and that the heart has 40,000 nerve cells which react independently to emotion and stress and have an influence on how the brain performs, including being available for intimacy and relationships through the production of hormones, one of which is oxytocin, or the cuddle hormone. Yes, that's the same hormone that creates the mother-infant bond and stimulates affectionate and loving feelings in men and women. And that hormone is produced after sex too, when we may have the opportunity to languish with a lover. When we are in a state of well-being, the heart is calm and steady and relays that information to the brain, and we experience peace, calm, well-being, stability, and balance, all things that enhance relationships. Here's a quote from my book by Hooghaven in 2006. Intimacy and sexuality are basic human needs that are intrinsic to people's sense of self and well-being. Regardless of age, individuals require companionship, intimacy, and love. Yet for older people, this intrinsic right is often denied, ignored, or stigmatized. For older people with dementia, the problem is even worse. They face the double jeopardy of being old and cognitively impaired. But I'm hopeful. This is me speaking now. I'm hopeful, and I think about the quote, the expression that you may have heard, the heart doesn't get wrinkles. So here's to our romantic selves for as long as we want them and they are available to us. 2, I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain and sensuality and dementia. I am not a brain specialist, but I wanted to know some basic things and then be able to write and talk about them in ways that I hope make sense for all of us. When our partner or someone we love, or if we ourselves are living with a diagnosis of the dementia, where many of the usual signs and language and behaviors of love, sensuality, and sex may have changed, we have an opportunity to create or reinvent what love, sexuality, sex, and well-being could look like and feel like, sound and taste and smell like, using all of our senses. When we contemplate well-being, we can decide to care for, nurture, and love ourselves. We can therefore be our own Valentine, our own loving, nurturing person who can be relied upon to show up, to be consistent in self-care, positive talk, and appreciation. In essence, to develop and nurture our own well-being, and then we can extend that to others. With knowledge about the person we support, learning how they might have done this for themselves and others in their lives, we are able to approximate or come as close as we can to how to make some of those experiences possible. I would add, as long as they're safe and legal. Life story work is a great way to engage with a person living with a dementia to ensure that we respond in person-centered and life-affirming ways to the need for connection and loving, nurturing, and sensual experiences, sometimes including sex, where appropriate, especially if this has been part of someone's adult life and relationships so far. The last time I introduced the idea that sex is hardwired into species survival as one of the biological imperatives or must-haves. This is why we can't just turn our sexual thoughts and feelings and behaviors off and on like a light switch. But what we can do is learn over time and maturation how to manage them, how to defer gratification until the time, place, and possibly the person is right. But if this is learned behavior, then it can also be forgotten, in part or completely, or both on different occasions and with different people. You can see how complicated it can be. We are in error if we place all responsibility for memory only in the brain. But that is easy to do since it is the primary organ in which the hallmark characteristics of cognitive change are found. We are embodied beings, which means that our brain does not function in isolation from the rest of the whole of our being, and our body and muscle and sensory memories interact with neurology. Here's a connection between sensuality and memory as a reminder. You may have heard of the French philosopher Marcel Proust, who writes in the early 20th century about the experience of tasting a freshly baked little cake called a madeleine, and how it transported him to his childhood and memories of Sunday mornings with his aunt. This has become sort of the framework, the template for engaging us with the sensory experience and how that can take us back to memories of all kinds. He's often quoted as being the first person to talk about this. And if you imagine a particular smell, taste, touch, or sight, it may transport you back to that time in your life and maybe even the people who were there. Some of those connections, however, may not be positive ones, and we need to bear that in mind when we are considering the impact of sensory stimulation or introducing it deliberately. What are your favorite scents and senses? Apple pie warm from the oven, orange blossom, Egyptian cotton sheets. For me, one of them is the smell of a certain aftershave. It was called Brute. I don't know if you had it in South Africa, but it takes me straight back to a first boyfriend many, many years ago. This just all goes to show that our brain and body are capable of remembering much more together, integrated and embodied, than our brains alone. And this actually is very good news. It opens up many more dimensions through which memory, connection, and communication can be accessed. What we need to be sensitive to, however, is that the sensory and sensual triggers that could be misunderstood by a person living with a dementia might create situations that in turn create responses that are less than helpful. Just for one example, the close proximity of the body of another person, the caregiver, and their intimate touch could trigger feelings and behaviors of a sexual nature when none was intended. 3, here are some brain basics. We know that the human brain weighs around 1.4 kilograms or 3 pounds and looks and feels like a bowl of yesterday's cold porridge. And it is the control center of all that is going on, but not alone in its efforts to make up the complete person, as we have already mentioned. It is composed of 73% water, and only a 2% reduction in water will cause dehydration severe enough to create confusion and affect thinking skills and abilities. It's 60% fat and uses 20% of all the body energy or calories produced. 25% of cholesterol in the body is in the brain and is essential to function. If you click your fingers, 100,000 nerve cell interactions have just taken place. How amazing is that? The brain is also the biggest sex organ. And I like to say, if it isn't happening in the headroom, it isn't happening in the bedroom. Of course, we know that sex doesn't always take place in the bedroom, but you get my gist. It controls all aspects of our chemical, hormonal, psychological, physical, emotional, and spiritual selves. From the interaction between the stimulation of our senses, thoughts, emotions, physical sexual responses, and climax, we could think of the process as different players in the orchestra under the leadership of the conductor, the brain. Although the brain needs to be fairly functional to engage with sex, alone or with another, it doesn't have to function perfectly. And because our sex impulse is deeply hardwired, as we said before, our memory about it may remain relatively intact. Equally, we may forget about sexual thoughts and behavior altogether, or may forget how to relate and to whom, but each person is different. Interestingly, the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain which is folded deep into its center, along with the limbic system and amygdala, are associated with our oldest evolutionary brain and prepare us when needed for the fight and flight response to stress and attack, along with a whole range of other emotions. The limbic system also steers us away from painful events and towards the pleasurable ones, including sex. So is it any wonder that when life doesn't hold too many fun and pleasurable experiences, our thoughts and feelings may turn to sex? Masturbation or self-pleasuring, or intercourse or fondling, and any type of sex we have enjoyed in the past may be available in our minds, if not in physical form in our bodies, when we consider these aspects. Masturbation or self-pleasuring is much more common than we might expect or believe, and interestingly, a behavior that still causes concern as something to be avoided, is dirty, is wrong, and in some cultures and religions is absolutely considered awful, dreadful. Person-centered training and open conversations with staff in hospitals, day centers, and care homes is essential to overcome our own stereotyping and prejudice, and also to support us to view those we care for as adult men and women who have most likely had a sex life, may still wish to have one now and in the future. Toddlers masturbate to climax without knowing that it is sex, just that it feels good. Babies respond to breastfeeding with erections and vaginal secretions, and their mothers can be aroused during the process of breastfeeding too. Sex in general and masturbation, when you don't have or want a partner, is a free, usually, and easily available form of stress release and relaxation, sleep enhancement, and a connection with self that still gives autonomy and agency to the person when other aspects of control over one's body and privacy may have become diminished. It is also an antidote to boredom. So you can see, I think, how sex is a distraction from everyday events. It is a normal experience and perhaps gives us an opportunity to think a little bit more openly and differently about masturbation and self-pleasuring. 4, brain, sex, and disinhibition. Sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are also key in healthy sex lives. Testosterone is involved with lots of other things as well as sex, and it tends to be associated with men, although women have testosterone as well. But it keeps men wanting sex, but not necessarily cuddles. And when you think of the embedded nature of the biological imperative, wanting sex in order to procreate so the species survives is probably, in that certain idea, more important for the species than having cuddles, although we really like cuddles as well now. It is also responsible for erections that may not have a connection with the man wanting to have sex. It's just how it's wired into the body, part of that biological imperative that we were talking about. This may help us to respond differently to a man living with a dementia who may have forgotten that erections can occur unbidden and unannounced. This could create a miscue that sexual action is now required. It could alert a care worker or family caregiver that something possibly inappropriate is happening or about to happen. But being informed, we can be sensitive to Phil as we support his need for privacy and not to call attention to him, causing further embarrassment and making him feel vulnerable. Misunderstanding can create stereotyping and labeling of what is natural yet unpredictable behavior in this case. Marilyn is well known for keeping her handbag with her at all times, and she gets quite cross if anyone else picks it up or tries to help her with it. One day in the lounge at the day center, her handbag falls open onto the floor. Out spills her vibrator and a couple of packages of batteries. Marilyn is acutely embarrassed. Jan, the staff member, comes to her aid and crouches on the floor between Marilyn and the other clients. Here, let me help you with your handbag, Marilyn. That's all she needed to say. Our person-centered responses to situations like these can make all the difference. Let's talk for a moment about disinhibition and the role the brain has in it. Disinhibition is a lowering of sexual and social defenses which the front part of the brain, the frontal cortex, controls. As a result of dementia or trauma, extreme pain or tumor, a person can become disinhibited. Socially, we lose our inhibitions through drugs and alcohol. We also learn how to switch off our desires, thoughts, and feelings, which keep us culturally and socially safe and appropriate. Pick's disease, a rare form of frontal dementia, can result in dramatic personality change and in people saying aloud what they are thinking without realizing that it will be offensive, overtly sexual, or upsetting to those hearing it. Because it is out of the realm of awareness of the person with a dementia, those supporting the individual must do their best to safeguard others in the vicinity, but also support the individual by ensuring that they are not vulnerable to abuse or further embarrassment. Women can become equally sexually disinhibited and their innermost sexual longings and behaviors set free. These deep-seated and fundamental sexual behaviors will remain when a cultural, social, or religious role concerning sexuality has been forgotten, because after all, we learn how to be appropriate within our own family context, our own religious and spiritual upbringing, and our own cultural context. So if we learn those behaviors when we are living with a dementia, we forget about that context. For a brief example, let me describe Mrs. Patel, who was living in the care home. Her husband had died several years earlier, and Mrs. Patel had made a relationship of affection and mutual companionship, but not a sexual relationship, with Reg. Mrs. Patel's family were not best pleased and said, "This will never happen. Our father is dead. Our mother will never look at another man, especially one not from our own culture. How can you allow this to happen?" It took a little while for us to help the family appreciate that Mrs. Patel had learned how to be a woman and a widow in her culture. But as a result of the dementia, she had forgotten all of that information and the way in which she was supposed to behave. And she was responding from her authentic woman self, person self, to be alongside someone for companionship, to be able to sit on the sofa and hold hands with Reg in the TV lounge. Eventually, the family did appreciate that this was the difficulty, but they decided that they would come to the home and take Mrs. Patel out instead of running the risk of seeing her with Reg, even though they knew and appreciated that this actually made her very happy. So we managed to get through a situation that could have been most difficult and can continue to allow Mrs. Patel and Reg to be just themselves and comfortable in each other's company. The uninhibited person and their sexuality may emerge over time throughout the progress of a dementia, including those who have lived a private life that did not bear any resemblance to the one that they lived in public view. This could mean that a person behaves sexually from a lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transsexual authentic self that had previously been hidden. It may also lead back in long-term memory to incidents of abuse as either the victim or the perpetrator, or to other partners and affairs outside of the already recognized partnership. and people may begin to talk and act in these ways that seem to some as coming out of the clear blue sky. Number 5. This brings me to the question I asked in our last session. If people have sex, why do they? For those that do, here are some of the responses from training events over the years that I've collected in my book. They are not all positive and romantic, but are definitely part of what humans will engage with. We want to know more about this because what might look like James or Anna wanting to have sex might be a number of other things. We can respond most appropriately and sensitively if we know that sometimes it is sex and sometimes it is a whole range of other possibilities with very different outcomes. Sex is energy. Like the energy that comes along with anger, it builds up to be discharged, either through orgasm in sex or through an argument, slamming the door and charging off in a huff to mow the lawn when we're angry. We know that there needs to be an outlet for the buildup of sexual energy and tension. And if sex, masturbation, and orgasm isn't a possibility, we can safely redirect men and women into an activity that is physical and uses up energy safely, resulting in that good feeling of tiredness and the need to relax afterwards. Let me just read you this list from my little book. So this list, in no particular order, is what people have said in my workshops. And the list is not limited to just these, but here's a sample. So why do people have sex? It feels good to get a promotion, peer pressure, to keep a job. It's a good stress reliever, to keep a secret. It's usually free and fun. Anger, revenge, a rite of passage, to keep a lover, exploration, curiosity, to experiment, to push my boundaries, to get it over with, reward, punishment, to have children, to show love and affection, fear, to be in control, lust, to take risks, to earn a living, to be naughty, to discredit someone or to get them in trouble, to gain a reputation, to be noticed and appreciated, to be good at something, to pay for drugs, booze, food, rent, clothes, to stay in a flat or a house, to do what is expected by parents or your culture, to piss off the parents or the establishment, pity, to force a relationship breakup, adultery, I can do it on my own, to be close, to reaffirm my identity, to feel attractive or desired, intimacy, warmth and cuddles, to have influence, for enjoyment, to go to great places like dinner, the theatre, and to travel before sex, and a response to boredom. In addition to the list above, there are other benefits that we can imagine that are more helpful around general health and that overall lead to a general improved sense of well-being. I mentioned a couple of them earlier, but they include increased appetite, longer and deeper sleep, reduced blood pressure, increased cardiovascular activity, reduced stress and anxiety, increased relaxation and vitality, increased mobility and flexibility, increased digestive motility and reduced constipation, to name but a few of the most common. The kind of exercise associated with sex is deemed to be healthy and more desirable and in more ways than the obvious. There are neuroscientists across the globe working on the belief that having sex is a positive influence, at least in rats, on the development of the brain cells in the hippocampus, which plays a vital role in memory. It is possible that the death of brain cells that lead to memory loss associated with dementia could be minimized. So having sex is not only good for us emotionally, physically, spiritually, and socially, but our brains like it too. Isn't that interesting? I think that's just fascinating, that it's good for our cell development as well. So here are some questions to consider for next time. And we will be exploring these in more detail. How do we support men and women's sexuality who are single and have developed a young onset dementia and are living in their own home? How do we support men and women of the LGBTQ+ communities who may be in partnerships or multiple partnerships or polyamorous relationship? How do we keep ourselves and others safe? How do we have person-centered conversations that can help us to respond most appropriately to issues of a sexual, intimate, and relational nature? I'd like to invite you to think about this for the next time. Have a think about what we do as humans when we would like to have sex, but are unable to do so. How have we learned to delay that gratification? When we know that about ourselves, because we're human, we can make some connections between what might also be relevant for others, particularly those living with a dementia, and what we might be able to introduce as safe, healthy alternatives to sex or masturbation when it's not either available or appropriate at the time. So I'll be looking forward to sharing this as part of our webinar on the 16th of March. And I'm going to end with the words from that lovely song from the old movie Casablanca, which we did last time, because we're still, I think, in this this phase of just past Valentine's, but also I think it's just appropriate in terms of us thinking about our loving, romantic, and possibly sexual selves as well. I promise I'm not going to sing it. You must remember this: a kiss is still a kiss. A sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things in life apply as time goes by. And when two lovers woo, they still say, I love you. On that you can rely, no matter what the future brings as time goes by. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danuta. That was so incredibly interesting, and it was wonderful listening to you. Really, we really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Karen, would you like to say something before we end the recording? Karen, you're on mute.
There we go. Danuta, once again, an enormous thank you for handling a subject which makes some people feel very uncomfortable, but allows people to some food for thought in terms of what it is really, because you've handled it in such a sensitive and such an appropriate way in order for us to all understand it within the context of it being a very special activity. So Danuta, thank you very much. What also comes through very clearly from the webinar, particularly today's, is the huge amount of exposure that you've had to different cultures, to different types of religions, etc., where I think there is a lot that is so different, but yet you've handled it in such a very sensitive way and a very well considered respectful way. Thank you so much for that. I think it is for many that work in care homes, is to be able to look at it like that, and to treat people from different cultures, and to treat a very sensitive subject like that in a very sensitive, respectful way, which sometimes can be very difficult, especially when it is that it's not your own reference point, or your own religious point. So thank you so much for that.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. One